Hey guys, it's Atheist for the Cause here, and I wanted to bring you another video about, this time about the alt-right and reality calls. And she was doing a live stream. She has over 40,000 viewers. And I asked her some questions in the chat, which she answered, but she was quite rude about it. And, you know, I think it's interesting because she thinks she's so intelligent, but she's full of she's full of internal contradictions. So let's take a look at what she's saying here, and then we'll get to it.
Out here. Um, Being a mixed race ethno-nationalist, how do you reconcile your mixed culture blood? Are you ashamed that you are not only white? Lots of questions here. Do you hate your non-white side? Do you try so hard to fit in with white people that you don't seem to find a connection to your Asian blood?
These are not my questions, by the way.
You are obviously from the UK. You are also a mixture with an Indian ancestor or two. Judging by your face and history between Britain and India, I'd say it's pretty close. Anyways, it's not my business. I just thought you should consider that you have indulged in a bit of self-hate. So, I do get, because I am a tiny part Indian, like one ancestor 4 generations ago was Indian. My great granddad was an Indian guy.
Okay, so if her great grandfather was Indian, that's really not that far away. Like, I knew my great grandfather for many years. I remember him. So, it's, you know, to have your great grandfather be Indian, like, there's a significant portion of you that isn't white.
So, and he married a woman who was like half Jew, half Christian. Like she literally went to synagogue and church
Oh, so his wife wasn't even white. Okay.
Saturday, Sunday. Um, so anyhow, I actually find it a little bit frustrating that people can't understand why I consider myself to be white.
Well, I mean, I think people can understand why you consider yourself to be white. You see her going into her pretentiousness mode here, and she's better than everybody, but really it's the issue is that you have all of these genetic arguments and arguments about IQ that stem from genes and things like that. And you say that people should only breed with their own race because of these issues. And you even say that, with your own um, race, that, like, while you're mixed, that's not a decision you would have made if, going back down your heritage. Even though, and that would kind of mean that you wouldn't exist. So, the issue here is, you have all those other arguments, but you yourself would be tainting any baby you had because you're not purely white. So anybody who was to have a child with you that also believes like you would be a bit of a hypocrite because they're looking over the fact that you're mixed, and that would be tainting your babies. And you even make it sound like it's a moral obligation not to be with other races. But part of your issue here too is you make a genetic argument over and over and over, and then you point to like things like racial identity, and racial identity doesn't have anything to do with genetics. So what you would really want to do is create a white ethno-state of not it's not really white though. It's more like white by self-identity, right? Because you're talking about how you identify as white. So you really wouldn't even end up with with a white ethno-state under your view?
Since, first of all, I am mostly white, most of my ancestors are
Of course you are.
white. Most of my ancestors are Celtic. I'm actually both a British.
You know, the problem here is not that people don't understand why you self-identify as white. The problem here is you misunderstanding what they're confused about.
Citizen and an Irish citizen. My dad is 100% Irish.
Because they see your
My
logical,
mum is half
your
Welsh.
internal
So like
contradictions.
that's 75% right there, pure Celtic. So it would be a little bit weird for me to identify as Indian. Not
Another bit while she's going on. I mean, I don't. This part's not as important for her, but um, you know, how to define white people is actually very difficult, and white people have many different cultures, and you know, there's not just like one white identity that everybody fits into. You know, are the Italians white? Are the Polish white? You know, so are the Iranians white? Are the Indians white? These are people that would be more white genetically, but through identity, they don't, you know, some of them don't look white. Some of them haven't been considered white in the past. So, you know, if you look throughout the history of Europe, there have been a long history of calling people not white that are actually close genetically.
to mention, you know, the German blood from my great grandma. So yeah, and I obviously I can show you my 23andMe. Can't really show you right now, but another time I can show you. And I'm clearly majority white. So
in your ethno-state, are you going to only include majority white people? Is that, you know, 50+%? Is that going to be the rule? Good luck with that one.
if I have to identify with any particular,
And if someone, consider if someone is 100% white, can they then be, should they then not worry about mixing because they're going to be with, you know, if they mix with, here's an issue I'm trying to get at. Let's say someone is 100% white, right? And somebody else is like, you know, let's say 5% white and like 95% black. And then they have a kid together. That kid is a majority white. Are you going to allow the child and the father into your white ethno-state? Say it's the father that's white and the mother that's black. And then deny the mother where she's not allowed into your ethno-state because she's black. These are some practical issues.
particular group of people, I'm going to identify with Celts. That is where most of my ancestors come from. My dad speaks fluent Gaelic. He grew up in Ireland. I have Irish citizenship.
Who cares what he
Happen
speaks?
to live in
Who
England.
cares what citizenship you have?
You know, I'm marrying a white guy. My kids are going to be like almost completely white.
He tainted like
so
you are under your own
it's kind of strange.
Or by your own ideology.
It's kind of strange to think that I would be identifying with my Asian side. That's all I'm saying.
Well, of course you wouldn't identify.
However, having said that, you know, I have been to
Solely.
India twice. Spent quite a lot of time there. Spent, I think, almost a total of about 3 months there.
Okay.
Been to a wedding in India. I've stayed with local Indians in their homes. I've traveled all around India, you know, the capital city, the south.
On to the next point.
I don't know what my IQ is. I haven't had it tested.
Oh, for this, I just wanted to point to the fact that she actually doesn't even know her IQ, and that's going to be important later because, IQ is such a big part of her ideology, that it's kind of funny that she doesn't even know it. She just assumes that she has a high IQ. And I actually doubt she has a high IQ just by listening to her, and someone's speech has a lot to do, has a high correlation with IQ. And I mean, she doesn't seem like, and even her points and her internal contradictions, none of it seems like she's that intelligent. So
Moved away.
I'm not saying she's stupid. It's just that I certainly don't see how she thinks she's that smart.
Would you let your kids go to a mixed race school? No way.
So she wouldn't let her kids go to a mixed race school, even though, mixed race schools are some of the best schools. Sure, there are some that are bad, but I found that interesting, and I think it shows she would shelter herself, or she would shelter her kids from being around other races. And I think that's a big problem because it shows these people who want this white ethno-state, like, this is not going to create peace. This is going to create war between different ethnic countries.
Having a stream with Emil Kierkegaard, the guy whose name I can't pronounce, do you think genetically modified offspring on a national level is a good thing? I think that in 99% of cases, you don't need to genetically modify. You can just select the appropriate embryo from a range of them. So I think that human genetic modification is appropriate in very few situations, and these would be like very specialist kind of situations where, there's a particular gene that causes a particular disease that can easily be replaced by a different gene that's not going to cause that disease. So that would be my approach. But as we become more adept at genetic modification in the future, say like, I don't know, 50, 100 years down the line, I imagine that it will just become a popular thing. And I don't see anything wrong with that, so long as we're good at doing it and we're not creating monsters accidentally.
Okay, so she's basically for long-term genetic modification, but then she, once we get good at it, she wants to go a selection temporarily over modification because we're not good at genetic modification yet, according to her. So here's the issue I have with that. Who's going to choose what genes are the best? You're gonna create, are you going to like modify the genes to not be other races? So if you can do that long term, I mean, and if so, wouldn't it be better to like allow Black people and Latino people, Asian people, and then you just take out their genes, their Asian genes or whatever, and put in white genes so that you have a bigger population?
And yeah.
And obviously, I'm trying to bring up, you know, a potential issue we could face with if people like her are, or that believe like her and maybe are even more extreme than she is, um, what genetic modification could lead to.
Should blacks in the US be deported to Africa? Um, well, I think a more reasonable situation would be to kind of like give them a state in the US and just to split the US up into different regions, you
Yeah,
know?
that's reasonable.
Um,
Okay, so the point here is that she thinks that blacks should be given their own state to be created into an ethno-state, and that whites should, like, so that whites can have, the rest of the country or whatever. And I'm guessing she would want to do that for Native Americans and Asians and all of these other races, because the United States has some of everything. Well, first of all, that's not reasonable, but second of all, there are some issues here. What makes the U.S. white land? You you basically just said that blacks shouldn't be deported to Africa because it's not reasonable, but that's the effect that you want to have. Like, you don't disagree with the principle of it. So it's this idea that, like, black people belong in Africa, but then white people would belong in Europe. And I know a lot of alt-righters don't like that argument, but it's perfectly, that's like the logical conclusion from what you guys think. So let's go to the next point, though. Oops.
if India and England were to form into ethno-nationalist states, where would you live? Okay, like get a clue. Where do you think I would live?
She's starting to get
Okay, if
irritated
someone
now.
is like a tiny bit Indian and a lot Celtic, where do you think they are most suited to live?
A tiny bit, okay. You, like, people know their great grandfathers and their great grandmothers, and both of them were, you said, were non-white significantly. So this is like, there is a lot of non-white blood in you. So this is like, you know, you might not be the one leading this white ethno state. And part of my problem with a white ethno state is it actually limits the rights of white people. Because, let's say, like I mentioned earlier, let's say, someone who's white has a child with someone who's, say, black, but mixed a little with white, then can the white person live in the ethno state? Can the child live in the ethno state? Can the black person live in the ethno state? It's really not as so basically you create a situation where white people have to start to choose, like, not to potentially have kids with ones they love, not to act on maybe a race that they're attracted to. And you even bring that up in some of your videos, that white people should like not give in to their desires for other races, which is like completely unnatural, by the way. You also make this naturalistic argument, but if people are attracted to other races, that is like a that's a naturalistic attraction. And all throughout history you can see where people have mixed with other races, so it's quite natural.
It really, like, I don't speak any Indian languages.
Wait, you don't speak any Indian languages? So, kind of like the black people in the United States that you'd want to make their own ethno-state. Kind of like how some of them were born in the United States and only speak English. They don't speak, Swahili or any of the, of those African languages. Uh, um, so it's just, here's another one of your internal contradictions, and you always like laugh like this is so obvious, and you're so oblivious to your own contradictions. It's quite amusing.
I don't actually, I know of some people who live in India, but I don't really know anyone who does live there. Um, I'm engaged to a guy who is a white American.
I'm gonna stop you here too and make another point. Because I think it was in her other video, but it might have been in this one. We'll see if we come across it. But she makes the point that she's actually like 3.5. I think she said 3.5% Neanderthal, and she laughs at it like that's nothing. But she's actually she has almost twice as much as the average person does of Neanderthal. Um, the average person has around 2% Neanderthal, and I got that from the Discovery 100 top stories of 2016. Oh, Discover magazine 100 top stories of 2016. It is their January edition, I believe. Yeah, January/February 2017 edition. And I'm looking right now for. There's actually 2 articles. If you get this magazine, you can check on page 14. There is the oldest human DNA revises our family tree. That's story number 4. And then there's another one on page 70, and this is the more relevant part. It says, it's why most present-day humans have about 2% Neanderthal DNA. Well, I'll read before that too. It says, we already knew that after leaving Africa roughly 65,000 years ago, modern humans interbred with Neanderthals. It's why most present-day humans have about 2% Neanderthal DNA. And this is another thing that I think the alt-right really fails to prove their point. I don't think they prove their point that interbreeding causes harm to the species. I mean, we seem to be doing pretty well, and we interbreeded with Neanderthals, so just keep that in mind. She's twice as Neanderthal as the average person, almost.
It makes 0 sense for me to live in India. And by the way, India already is ethno-nationalist. Breaking away from the British was an act of ethno-nationalism.
Well, kind of, but that's another debate.
What would you say to people who consider all identity politics bad and equate the alt-right with SJWs?
I actually love this question. It's so accurate. They're they're basically like a counter. They're kind of like a counter movement to SJWs. They see a lot of white people are starting to see the SJ. She even actually talks about how white people are being attacked. I think it's a different video. Um, and uh, you know, it's creating this white identity because you have, you know, basically the SJWs prefer any non-white person. So, and black people have a strong black identity. Latinos even have somewhat of a Latino identity, but it's not nearly what the black identity is. And this creates conflict and problems for white people. And white people are discriminated against. I agree with her on that. But, you know, and so, like, I think the alt-right brings up a lot of good points about discrimination white people face and things like that. But like many other groups, especially the SJWs, they go about things completely wrong. They like come to completely wrong conclusions. So, anyways, let's hear what she has to say on this.
I'd say that they are oversimplifying, you know.
Oh, sorry, it's not the conclusions that are wrong. It's like their logic that is wrong, actually.
I mean, that's as simple as it gets, eh? Are you engaged to Richard Spencer? No. Is your mum?
Let's go to the next point. Sorry, I thought she was gonna say more there, but she didn't. But I do want to get, the point across that the alt-right really are, like the SJWs. They have racial identity, just like the SJWs stress racial identity. And the alt-right discriminates against non-whites, and the SJW discriminate against whites. So I don't think it's fair to just say it's shallow or whatever she said, or it's an oversimplification, she said, and then move on. You really didn't have an answer if that's all you've got. You didn't even explain why you think it's a oversimplification.
If there isn't such a massive assault on Western heritage as it's happening now, would you then be less hunkered down and more open to things like interracial marriages? Good question. If we weren't being lied to, if we weren't being lied to, being told that like everyone has to be equal and everyone is equal and IQ is meaningless and white people are bad and you've got to accept all of this immigration from the third world and you've got to give loads of foreign aid to these countries that are exploding in population because they can't control their own growth rate and can't even feed their own kids. And all this nonsense that I've spoken about in other videos.
Okay, I'm gonna address some of that. It's not that IQ is meaningless. Well, it is in the sense of the IQ is just a measurement. It's actually what IQ is measuring that is important, but that's more semantical. But it's the way you go about it. there are some people that say IQ is meaningless, and that what IQ measures is, the intelligence isn't. It doesn't mean anything, but I think I disagree with them, obviously, but you go like so far the other way, and then you choose these arbitrary groups that you happen to identify as, and you like you just run with them as like, oh, white people on average are have a higher IQ, so we should only breed with others in our race. Like, it's just, it's so simple minded. There are so many other factors.
If we weren't being fed all that stuff and we were just being left alone, basically, I think we would just be naturally ethno-nationalist and generally marry our own kind.
Based on what? There have been, like, before all of this happened, in modern times, people have been intermingling for ages. Every time people have run into each other, they've acted in different ways, but sometimes they traded, sometimes they enslaved, sometimes they killed, but there was a lot of intermingling, even with slaves. So I don't know why you think that we would just naturally remain like ethno-states forever. I mean, we kind of started as ethno-states just based on evolution, but the more that the world becomes populated and those different groups of people run into each other, the less ethno-state you're going to have, the fewer ethno-states you're going to have.
Mind. And yeah, I actually don't have a huge problem with like individuals who happen to fall in love with someone of a different race and have kids. I mean, I would say consider the IQ differences because your kids are going
to they're not marrying or they're not having a child with like the entire race. It's one person. That person could have any IQ. I mean, so a white woman shouldn't have a child with Neil deGrasse Tyson because he's black and black people on average have lower IQ. Oh, and she thinks she's so smart. By the way, keep in mind, she herself doesn't know her own IQ.
Going to inherit them because IQ is mainly genetic. Consider the implications for your children. Mixed race children tend to have higher rates of mental illness because they have a very confused idea about their identity.
She keeps bringing up identity, but let's rewind that to get the point.
Differences because your kids are going to inherit them because IQ is mainly genetic. Consider the implications for your children. Mixed race children tend to have higher rates of mental illness because they have a very confused idea about their identity.
Wait, they have this would be a cultural impact because people like you are creating racial identities. So, there's nothing natural about like a white identity as you're explaining it. Because throughout history, white people have fought each other, black people have fought each other. It's and they fought each other because they viewed each other as different.
So
I mean, as different people, she's talking about we're all white, basically. We all have white identity, and that makes us the same. But white people in the past, didn't have that identity. And up until basically now, white people in the United States for sure did not have a white identity, but it's just not on much of a grand scale. But I mean, I guess it started, you know, I would even say going back to slavery, it wasn't really a white identity, because it was more of like a non-black thing. You know, they had issues with amongst each other. You know, it wasn't really a white purity test. Lots of white people were indentured servants and all that kind of thing too.
As I said, I'm mainly libertarian as opposed to authoritarian. I would rather not make stuff illegal. But it's more a priority to me to actually
consider what the people who likely lead a white ethno-state would do, though.
Make the truth be known. The truth about IQ differences, the truth about the fact of inequality and the inability.
Okay, but the truth isn't what you think it is, by the way.
To reconcile those differences without implementing communism, which is basically the proposed solution.
No, the proposed solution is fascism.
Yeah, that's all I want to do. I want to have free speech, talk about the situation. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't.
I don't remember if she said it right there or in a different video, but at one point she says that there are waifus, or maybe she'll go on about it later, and I might be spoiling, but we'll see. But let's just continue. I think it's because my question's coming up, and I think it's that's where she goes off about it.
I actually can't believe how stupid some people are in my comments.
This is me.
It's actually really disheartening.
Let's listen to how stupid I am.
Not in like a way that I feel personally attacked or anything.
Because I didn't personally
but just because being surrounded by stupid people is depressing. So this person asks, so why aren't you...
Excuse me. I'm one person, and yet, you're just surrounded by stupid people. Because I asked a question. So let's see how dumb this question is. Just realize the pretentiousness and the lack of humbleness and humility that she's starting off with. She thinks she's so smart.
You're trying to marry an Asian if you care about IQ so much. Because it's actually really disheartening. Not in like a way that I feel personally attacked or anything. But just because being surrounded by stupid people is depressing. So this person asks, so why aren't you trying to marry an Asian if you care about IQ so much?
So why aren't you trying to marry an Asian if you care about IQ so much? That's what I asked. This is what made her go off on a rant about being surrounded by stupid people. Now let's hear her answer. Now keep in mind all of her other statements up to this point that I've been pointing out to you. Because here's going to be some, once again, incoherent or rambling, it's going to be internal contradictions.
Because it's not just IQ. It's actually, again, there is an entire group of people online. I think they're like on Reddit, and they have this entire Reddit about hafus, people who are half Asian, half white. And they are not happy about it. They feel really bad about the fact that they don't have a single ethnic.
Yeah, and there's a lot of white people, purely white people, that aren't happy about being white. because of stupid SJWs that have taught white people and, you know, the professors and the schooling system who have basically been anti-white. The Democratic Party has been anti-white. All, you know, a lot of society is becoming anti-white and teaching that, you know, whites have done all these terrible things, and people have this white guilt and now hate, you know, themselves because they're white. Does that mean white people shouldn't have children because their white child might not want to be white? Do you see how stupid your point is? You're laughing at me for how dumb of a question I asked, saying how you're surrounded by such stupid people, and you give such an idiotic response. I mean, my God. I'm not even being like technical here. Your point is just completely idiotic.
Identity, and they complain all day long about it on this forum. So you can go and look.
Yeah, that's a cultural issue. There's nothing wrong with them being half Asian, half white. So
Look it up, Hafus, HAFU on Reddit. But the other reason is if I want high IQ offspring, I can just marry someone who happens to have high IQ of my own race.
No shit. Or you could just marry someone who had a high IQ of another race. It's almost like having an ethno-state isn't necessary. Imagine that. Because people can just choose to marry someone of high IQ if that's what they value.
And I am. So my fiance has very high IQ. And we're gonna have
And by the way, to the other alt-righters that aren't as stupid, I know there are other arguments that are better than what she's making for the alt-right and for an ethno-state, a white ethno-state, or racial ethno-states around the world. I'm using her own worldview. Okay, I'm working within her own worldview, so don't go get all offended that, you know, what I'm saying right now might not apply to your worldview, because that's because your arguments are likely better than what the shit she's spewing right now. It's amazing that she has over 40,000 viewers, honestly, because like the stuff that comes out of her mouth is so uninteresting.
likely gonna have very high IQ children.
You don't even know your own IQ to say that. Jesus, lady. You're so full of yourself. Oh, excuse me. But you're both white, right? Even though you have Neanderthal and you at almost twice the rate that other people do, that the average person does. But yeah, your kids will come out with such high IQ. We'll see about that. I think you might be a little disappointed.
So, yeah, you don't have to choose one or the other. The reason that I'm saying I don't think most people are aware of the IQ, like the IQ difference, for example, white women having children with black men, they're probably not aware that over 90% of black men don't leave the woman as a single mother when in.
What are you talking of? Yeah, I know all these statistics, but that you were talking about IQ, and you just made like some sort of switch to, you know, the family. And now, don't get me wrong, the family has some impact on IQ, but that's an environmental issue. And in fact, a lot of what you complain about in terms of IQ, like, you know, especially among races, it's a lot of environmental factors. I would say malnutrition is one of the biggest factors that Black people have lower IQ. I mean, if you look, it's like sub-Saharan Africa where black people have far lower IQ. But then in the US, um, their IQ is actually considerably higher. And it's, I would have to go look at the numbers again, but their IQ is like not much lower than white people in the US. So it's within reason. And keep in mind, um, in terms of building a country, um, people don't have to be like, you're talking about IQ as if you want to have the highest IQ possible, right? But really, as long as someone can be productive, you want them to have a high enough IQ that they can be productive. Because if they're productive, they're going to benefit the country. So, for the most part. So, like, this idea that, you know, obviously there's variance in IQ. So this idea that um, you have to be with white people to get a high IQ and all of that, it's idiot. I mean, and for these other factors, like, you're just making shit up as you go now. You know, what other factors, genetically speaking, are you talking about that you can't get from another race? And also, like, there are genetics that other races have that white people don't have that could be highly beneficial. For instance, a lot of white people are alcoholics. You know, just a lot of people in general are alcoholics. And Asians are at a point where about 50% of them are born with a gene mutation that it's an alcoholic intolerance. So if they drink alcohol, they turn like a bright red. I've heard it referred to as the Asian gene before, but they turn like a bright red, and it doesn't actually physically harm them, but it's displeasurable enough that most of them, well, I don't want to say most, but a lot of Asians don't drink alcohol that have this gene because it's displeasurable for them. It makes them feel a little sick, and they get so bright red it's kind of embarrassing for them. Now, if white people had that, they might stay away from alcohol at a little higher rate. So if that got bred into the white population, that would be a good thing. What you're talking about would be basically genetic stagnation. You get, you know, good genes by variation, and then in terms of a group, so you'll have some people will get, you know, a genetic mutation or something, and most of the time it'll be bad, and those people will die off at a higher rate. And then sometimes they'll be more sterile or whatever, and then sometimes it'll be good, and they'll do better in society, and then it will like breed into the population and survive in the population a lot better. And the same is true if you like breed something in from like another race. Like, there's a good chance that if the Asian gene was bred into white people, that it would probably survive, and whites would then have this mutation that would protect them from becoming alcoholics. So there's like, your worldview is just so simplistic that you really don't know what you're talking about. You really don't understand the full ramifications. You're not thinking through it well. And I'm not even an expert on this stuff, but you clearly aren't either. I mean, I've talked to some alt-writers that have some pretty good arguments. but you are not bringing the good arguments up. And the good arguments that you do bring up, you like destroy with terrible argumentation and logic.
In mixed relationships, they're probably not aware that black men have a far higher incidence
And
of domestic
reasoning.
violence. They're probably not aware that black men have a far higher incidence of STDs. And they're probably not aware that they are likely going to have lower IQ children than if they.
That's not that's not true. You're not just picking a random person in the black community. Remember what you said earlier about like you could just choose someone that had a high IQ? Yeah, because I brought up the fact that Asians and Jews, you couldn't she didn't repeat it, but she actually responded earlier that to my question about how Asians and Jews have higher IQ than whites. And the Asians having higher IQ was the original question. So, but yeah, Asians and Jews have higher IQ than whites, and her response was that she could just choose a high IQ person, a white person, but she seems like completely incapable of extending that logic to another race. It's kind of funny.
They married a white guy, on average.
So my point here is that with our own logic, a white woman could just marry a high IQ black person that doesn't have STDs. It's not like they're just throwing a dart, okay? they're making a judgment, and she's acting like that. As many of the alt-right people do, they act like things that aren't random they treat as random, and things that are random they treat as not random. And it's one of their biggest fallacies.
Now, they could find a really high IQ, wonderful black guy, and they wouldn't have those problems.
Exactly.
But what I'm pointing out is they are going into the situation.
See, she can acknowledge it, but she can't really extend the logic that far, because she's already got her answer and she's trying to work to it, because she would realize that the statement she just said completely demolishes, her earlier logic. So let's hear her counter to this now.
Blindly and unaware, because of political correctness, stops people from pointing out.
She just randomly brings in political correctness. That's not what we're talking about at all. The issue would be political correctness. It wouldn't be we need to create an ethno-nationalist state. I mean, Jesus Christ, lady. You're just like jumping around picking bits and pieces that you've remembered from what smarter people than you have said. And now you're trying to put it all into a coherent argument, and it's just not working.
These unfortunate facts. Hope that makes sense.
Nope, it didn't. I mean, I understood what you were trying to say, but the logic just doesn't add up. So, and what really doesn't make sense is how you can think that you're so intelligent when you don't know your own IQ. You think that, white people have such a benefit on other races. Keep in mind, in order to really make this a major policy, someone has to think that, race has a huge impact on genes. It can't just be that white people are slightly more intelligent than other races, because it wouldn't make sense to limit your options by as much as she wants to limit them. And for a slight increase in IQ, and not even an increase, but a slight increase in variation of IQ is really what it is. And there are like a whole bunch of issues to, with the environmental factors and all of that, where among black people, if you change their conditions, their environment, like their IQ raises so much. You know, if you actually look at black people throughout the world, and I wish I had the statistics on me, but I didn't get them. That's not really what this was intended for. It's more to talk about her ideas and their internal contradictions. But read Thomas Sowell. He's got a couple of books on race, and I think there's one called let's see, I have one right here, Intellectuals in Society. Has some points about basically all over the world there are black people with like massively different IQs. So if you're talking like, I think it might be like in the 80s in sub-Saharan Africa, or maybe even lower, where it's like the average IQ for black people in the United States is like over 120 or something like that. It's like a massive, massive difference. And so it shows that, maybe malnutrition in Africa has something to do with this, something serious. So, and there, we don't fully understand IQ either. There's a lot here, and there are a lot of political issues that I think scientists shouldn't have to deal with as the political issues that they're dealing with. They should be able to discuss IQ in a more open setting without their job being threatened. But it's people like Reality Calls that take this information and misuse it, and people that are even far more far more extreme than her, that like the Nazis of the world, that take those arguments or take the information and pervert them to such an extent. So overall, Reality Calls has a lot of internal contradictions, despite her thinking she's so intelligent. And I think she needs to go through a little introspection here. Go back, and if we go back to 3540, just to remind you, my question was, why not marry Asians if you care about IQ so much? I didn't even mention how Jews have higher IQ than whites on average. But just watch how she freaks out so badly. And I think the reason she freaks out again is because she knows I have a point here. She really can't deal with it well. So she has to make it seem like I'm being ridiculous and that I'm so stupid. She's got to attack my credibility because she really doesn't have a response. Just like watch her reaction again, and then listen to her response and ask yourself, did she really like refute any point that I was implying here?
I actually can't believe how stupid some people are in my comments. It's actually really disheartening. Not in like a way that I feel personally attacked or anything, but just because being surrounded by stupid people is depressing. So this person asks, so why aren't you trying to marry an Asian if you care about IQ so much? Because it's not just IQ. It's actually, again, there is an entire group of people online. I think they're like on Reddit, and they have this entire Reddit about hafus, people who are half Asian, half white. And they are not happy about it. They feel really bad about the fact that they don't have a single ethnic identity. and they complain all day long about it on this forum. So you can go and look it up, Hafus, Hafu, on Reddit. Um, but the other reason is if I want high IQ offspring, I can just marry someone who happens to have high IQ of my own race. And I am. So my fiance has very high IQ. And we're likely gonna have very high IQ children. Um,
I'll just leave it there. Um, I'll, I'm satisfied with that reminder of just how arrogant she was being and how she really lacked a coherent response to what I said. To make my question out to be like it was such a stupid question. So, have a great day, guys. This is what is known as the alt-right, or maybe she's alt-light. Um, she's kind of in that range. So, she's not as extreme as a lot of alt-righters are, but so I guess maybe she falls actually in what they're calling alt-light now, but they're basically two subcategories of the same group. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. I think I'm going to be doing another video on her because I took a bunch of notes on another video and it's just as ridiculous as this one. And I actually accidentally watched that one thinking it was this one, and then so I took all those notes, I have them, and I came across more ridiculous stuff and then realized, oh, this isn't the right video, so I just finished it, and I have that in waiting. So keep an eye out. I might attack more alt-right arguments in the future, but I'm not sure how much I really want to get caught up in alt-right. You know, the fact that they're you know, when it comes, they're so simple-minded in how they group people, doing it simply based on race. That's my biggest issue. One of my biggest issues. Where if what you really care about is IQ, with maybe a few other genetic factors, which they really, you know, like reality calls didn't really identify well. I mean, why not actually look for those factors, you know, genetically? Why? And then we'll try to create an environment. Why wouldn't most of your argument be on environment and improve the environment to get the most out of people? So, but it's kind of weird how they prioritize genetics based on the skin color, which doesn't even really show the genetics of a person. So, anyways, have a good one, guys. And I hope I did a good job arguing my point. I know I sometimes get caught up in my words, but look at the spirit of my points, and I think I made a lot more sense than she did. So, talk to you guys later.